In August of 1994, 512 people showed up to a convention hall in Milwaukee to find out who was the best Magic the Gathering player alive. Nobody really knew what that meant yet. The game was barely a year old. There was no Pro Tour, no ranking system, no established archetypes written down. There wasn't even a judge program yet. People were building decks out of whatever was in print. Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Arabian Nights, Antiquities, and Legends, with almost no restrictions on what you could run. Black Lotus was legal. All 5 Moxen were legal. You could run 4 copies of nearly anything you wanted. 3 days later, an American named Zach Dolan walked out as the first world champion in the history of this game, and the deck that got him there is still talked about in real detail 30 years later. This is the story of Magic's first world championship. Welcome to the first episode of this channel, where we're going to be covering the history of competitive Magic from the very beginning. There's no better place to start than the beginning itself. Check out my original channel, MTG Chronicles, if you want to know the lore of the game, and subscribe to this channel if you want to know the competitive history of the game. We're going to look at the players, the decks, the competitions, all the way from the beginning up until the present time. So if you want more of that, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Let's dive in. The first World Championship was held at Gen Con in Milwaukee from August 19th to the 21st in 1994. Everything about its structure looks completely foreign compared to what competitive Magic actually looks like today. It was open to anyone who wanted to register. No invitations, no qualification requirements, but it was capped at 512 competitors. It was single elimination, straight through, no Swiss rounds cushioning your run, no second chances if you drew badly in round 1, and it was played entirely in what was then called Type 1, what we'd now call Vintage, because Type 1 wasn't a specialized high-powered format back then. It was just Magic. Every card that existed was legal, restricted list exceptions aside, because the game hadn't yet split into different eras of power level. This was simply what Magic was back in 1994. The format ran across 3 days. Winners kept advancing through single elimination brackets, getting funneled down into qualifying heats of 64, until the finals started Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Among the competitors that weekend, buried in the bracket, were people who'd go on to shape the game professionally for decades. Mark Rosewater, who had become Magic's head designer, was in the field. Jim Lynn, a future Wizards of the Coast vice president, was also there. The head of the DCI, Steve Bishop, was on site running the event itself. The funny part, though, is none of them made the Final Four. By the time the tournament reached its final stretch, something specific had become clear. European players were considered ahead of American players at this point in the game's history, and the bracket reflected it. 3 of the last 4 competitors standing were European. Bertrand Lestray, the reigning French national champion, was the player everyone feared. His reputation had been building all weekend long. Word was he was running the Channel Fireball combo, where you dump your entire life total into mana with Channel, then fire it all back out through a single massive fireball. And rumor had it, he'd used it to kill 4 separate opponents on the first turn of the game. He was also running Chaos Orb, the infamous physical flip artifact that destroys whatever it lands on, and people swore he could drop it exactly where he wanted to, every single time. Zach Dolan, an American, later admitted in his own account of the weekend that he spent the tournament specifically hoping he wouldn't get paired against Lestray. Everyone considered the Frenchman the man to beat. The other semifinal was an all-French affair. Lestray against fellow countryman Cyril de Foucauld. Lestray won at 2-0, cementing his status as the favorite heading into the final. On the other side of the bracket, Dolan defeated Belgium's Dominic Simmons 2-0 to punch his own ticket to the final. That set the stage. An American nobody particularly expected to be there against the tournament favorite that half the field had spent the weekend afraid of drawing. Zach Dolan's deck is one of the most thoroughly documented relics of early competitive Magic, and it's worth walking through in detail, because it tells you exactly how different people were building decks in 1994 compared to how competitive Magic works today. Dolan ran a green-white-blue control shell, sometimes remembered as a prison deck, sometimes as Stasis Control, depending on who's telling the story, because those genre lines simply didn't exist yet as fixed archetypes. His mana base ran Tundras, Tropical Islands, and Savannas, backed by Library of Alexandria and all 5 Moxen plus Black Lotus. Where most of his opponents were maximizing redundancy by running 4 copies of their best cards, Dolan deliberately zagged the other way. He built his deck around single copies of a large number of powerful, disruptive cards rather than stacking up multiples of a few: Icy Manipulator, Winter Orb, 2 copies of Meek Stone, 2 copies of Stasis, Black Vice, Ivory Tower, backed by the format's premier blue power cards: Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, Time Twister, and Mana Drain. The plan was simple to describe, but brutal to play against. Lock the board down with repeatable stacks effects until your opponent literally couldn't do anything. Then close the game out slowly through incidental damage or a concession once the position became hopeless. It wasn't built to race anyone. It was built to make sure nobody could ever get started. One detail from Dolan's own account of the tournament is worth remembering because it captures exactly what competitive preparation looked like in an era before deck building theory existed in any organized form. The night before the World Championship, he was in a casual, unsanctioned multiplayer pod. Commander didn't exist yet. The Judge program didn't exist yet. This was just some players and friends messing around when an opponent dropped a wave of huge creatures into play using Eureka. Watching that happen convinced Dolan, on the spot, to add a second copy of Meekstone to his deck. Later, that same night, in an entirely different free-for-all game, another opponent mentioned offhand that Recall might be a good include for a strategy. Both suggestions, offered casually by strangers the night before the biggest tournament of his life, ended up winning him games at Worlds the very next day. He also, according to that same account, spent that night sleeping in his car because he hadn't booked a hotel room in advance. The final between Dolan and Lestrade was a best of 3, and it swung hard in both directions before it was decided. Game 1 went to the Frenchman, and it went fast. He got Whirling Dervish online, backed it with Burn, and finished Dolan off with what's remembered in the record of the match as a Channel Ball, the Fear Channel into Fireball combo everyone had been whispering about all weekend long, doing exactly what the rumors said it could. Final score of that game, Dolan 0, Lestrade 13. Dolan made sideboard changes going into game 2. Lestrade didn't change a card. The second game ran long, well over 20 turns, a real grind rather than a fast blowout. Both players traded resources across the whole game. At one point, Bertrand used a Demonic Tutor fetched off a Black Lotus to immediately cast a Mind Twist for 2 cards against Dolan. Dolan stole a Curd Ape off Lestrade with a Control Magic, only for Lestrade to Lightning Bolt his own creature rather than let Dolan keep it. Dolan tried to stabilize with a Serra Angel. Lestrade had a Psionic Blast waiting before it even resolved fully into play. Eventually, Dolan's disruption pieces caught up. He unloaded his hand across 2 big turns: Time Elemental, Time Walk, Howling Mind, Meekstone, Icy Manipulator, and started pulling ahead on cards in tempo at the same time. Lestrade tried to fight back with Argothian Pixies and Mishra's Factory, chipping away at Dolan's life total while Dolan slowly assembled his lock. When Lestrade eventually rebuilt pressure with a Whirling Dervish and another creature, Dolan answered with a Wrath of God, wiping the board clean. Then came the finishing sequence, with Bertrand already sitting under a Karma, the enchantment that punishes players for the number of swamps they control, and playing 2 Bayous into that damage source. Dolan countered Lestrade's remaining plays with a Mana Drain and a Power Sink, regrowthed the Power Sink back for a second use, and then cast Stasis. That was the moment the game ended. Realizing what a lockdown board combined with an active Karma actually meant for his life total, Lestrade conceded rather than play it out. Final recorded life totals for the match: Dolan 35, Lestrade 10. Zach Dolan, the American nobody had expected to make the final, had just beaten the man half the tournament field was afraid to face, and became the first world champion in Magic the Gathering's history. By modern standards, the prize for becoming the first world champion in the history of this game was almost comical. Dolan received a trophy, a deck of poker-style cards featuring Magic card backs, a t-shirt, and a stack of booster packs pulled from expansions ranging from Arabian Nights all the way up through the then-released Ice Age. There was no 6-figure prize pool. There was no televised final. A video recording of the finals was actually shot that day, and the tape was later lost, meaning the only surviving record of the most important match in the game's young competitive history is a card-by-card written transcription, painstakingly reconstructed and preserved by the community rather than by any official archive. Dolan played one more Worlds, in '95, where he finished 10th, and competed in the first 2 Pro Tours before retiring from professional play. He never chased it as a career the way later champions would. because in 1994, there wasn't yet a career to chase, and that's the point. This tournament happened before anyone involved, the players, the judges, the company running it, had any real concept of what competitive Magic would eventually become. The 1994 World Championship proved something Wizards of the Coast didn't fully know yet going into the competitive scene, one deep and serious enough to justify building real infrastructure around it. A second World Championship followed in 1995, this time invitation only, with multiple formats and a Pro Tour launched in 1996. Everything that competitive Magic became over the following 3 decades, the ranking systems, the national circuits, the Hall of Fame, the massive multi-format World Championship events happening today, traces its root back to this one single elimination bracket in a Milwaukee convention hall, run by a company that was still trying to figure out, in real time, what they had actually built and what they had on their hands. Zach Dolan slept in his car, took deck building advice from strangers in a casual pod the night before, and beat the most feared player in the tournament with a deck built on this simple, stubborn idea that if you deny your opponent the ability to do anything at all, you don't have to race them to the finish line. That's where competitive Magic starts. We'll be going through the next 30 years of it, one championship at a time. We'll dive in again soon.